Hello and welcome to another episode of Guitar and Pen, a songwriter's notebook. I'm your host, Mark Will, author, songwriter, and publisher in permanent exile, currently based on the island of Taiwan. Today's topic is the last Beatles song, so called. Of course, I'm talking about the newly released Beatles single, Now and Then. Now, you may be asking yourself, why are we talking about a Beatles song when there's a genocide or an ethnic cleansing or a humanitarian catastrophe occurring in the Middle East? I can only say that every other asshole on YouTube has given his or her reaction to this song, and as a lifelong Beatleologist myself, I feel I have every right to weigh in. So today I will be providing you with my analysis, breakdown, and reaction to Now and Then, even if I may feel that, yes, there are issues of greater import. All right, as many people know, Now and Then is one of three John Lennon demos which the surviving Beatles used as the basis for new songs. What happened was Yoko Ono gave the surviving Beatles, and at that time it was Paul, George, and Ringo. George was still alive at that time. It was the early 90s when they were working on the anthology project. But Yoko gave them a cassette tape with some demos that John had recorded before he was murdered in 1980. I don't know, maybe it was more than one tape, but there were three songs that the surviving Beatles tried to make something out of. Okay, now and then the demo that was made into a song, and the one that we're considering today was recorded, we believe, in 1977. So do the math. It took them however many years to finish it in 2023. It was just released a few days ago. So they had this demo from 1977. Now, there were other Lennon demos as well. Those other demos were Free as a Bird. That was also apparently recorded in 1977. And the Beatles actually finished the song while working on the anthology project and released it in 1995. This track was produced by Jeff Lynne of ELO fame. And there was another demo called Real Love, which we believe was recorded in 79 and 80. I think there were actually several versions of this song. There was something called Real Life, something called Real Love. Anyway, bits and pieces were put together, and the result was this single released in 1996, Real Love, which is I would say it's a masterpiece. I would say that's their final masterpiece. But more on that later. The other two demos, Free as a Bird and Real Love. So they finished those two while they were working on the anthology project. Both of these were produced by Jeff Lynne. George was still alive and made very important contributions to both songs. But even though they tried to do something with Now and Then, it just wasn't possible. They eventually gave up. And one reason is because, according to George, the demo was fucking rubbish. He said it, not me. Okay. So how did, after George's death, how did Paul and Ringo make a song out of fucking rubbish? Well, uh, when they were working with Peter Jackson on the Get Back documentary, which came out, I want to say last year. Has it been 2 years since its release? I think it was 2022. Very good documentary, very interesting. Um, Very surprising that he was able to make something out of all that footage. But anyway, while working on this project, he informed Paul and Ringo, probably mostly Paul, that it was possible to um, use AI, machine learning, to separate the vocal from the piano. Now, remember, there was a cassette, a demo, which George called fucking rubbish. And I've heard the demo, or at least what, you know, is claimed to be the demo. You can listen to it on YouTube or maybe other places. And yeah, the quality is not good. The audio quality is not good. John's voice cannot always be clearly heard. And, you know, even when it can be, there's interference from the piano because when he played the demo, he's just accompanying himself on the piano as he sings. So the audio is not good. But Peter Jackson told the surviving Beatles, guess what? AI can now take that single track of piano and vocal and split the piano and vocal as two tracks. It can isolate piano and vocal and give you two distinct tracks. One piano, one vocal. Okay, so problem solved. Now, when I originally heard that the Beatles were using AI for a new song, I thought, what on earth is this? This is sacrilege. This is not allowed. How can this be? What are they going to do? Tell Chat GPT to, you know, create a vocal and a lyric and a melody in the style of John Lennon? No. Please no, say it ain't so. Well, that's not what happened. As I say, it was just, AI was just used to split vocal and piano. So we had two distinct tracks. And this is perfectly legitimate. I can remember when I had a cassette tape of myself. I was accompanying myself on an acoustic guitar and singing. It was on a cassette, and I converted it. I converted it to digital format. I had the cassette converted to MP3 or WAV. Because the technology had developed at that time to such an extent that this was possible. So something similar is going on here. And of course, the Beatles were always experimenting with the latest technology. So as a Beatleologist, I give it my seal of approval. So basically, what we have is Lennon revived. Just as now in concerts while on tour, Paul duets with a recording of John during the rooftop concert. I think they play "I've Got a Feeling" together. So it's kind of like the ghost of Lennon past revived. There's something haunting, eerie, nostalgic, beautiful about it. All right, let's talk about the song itself. Now and Then, this track that has just been released. Um, it begins with a count off, which is interesting because the opening track to the Beatles' very first album, Please Please Me, released in 1963, features a similar count off, although it's much more energetic. It's a 1, 2, 3, 4. That's Paul at the beginning of I Saw Her Standing There. So the Beatles, you could say, burst onto the scene, with a count off, 1, 2, 3, 4, and one of their greatest early songs, in my opinion, I Saw Her Standing There, begins. Their first album, Please Please Me, opens with I Saw Her Standing There. So there's precedent for this count off, which is nice. And then again in 1966, with the recording of Taxman, we hear George doing a 1, 2, 3, 4, a 1, 2. There's another count off. So I think it's appropriate that the last Beatles track, you got the first Beatles track. Arguably, there were some singles before that, but the opening track to the debut album begins with a count off. Then in their heyday, they begin their psychedelic period with Revolver, and the first track on Revolver is Taxman. That also has a count off. And then the last Beatles song, so-called, also has a count off. It's kind of an old man's count off. It's a 1, 2, 3, and then it just sort of fades out. So it's interesting. I think they're alluding to their past. There's some self-referential signification going on there, which I don't disapprove of. I like it. All right. And then if you've heard the original 1977 demo of John's, you'll notice that it's a bit slower than the version that was recently released. In fact, it was about 80 BPM, beats per minute, and the single that was just released is 88 beats per minute. So they sped it up a bit, and that too is not without precedent. I know the story of the title track to the album Help, released in 1965. That's a John song also. And apparently, I've not heard the original, but apparently the demo was a Dylan-esque dirge, very slow, brooding, plodding perhaps. And when John shared it with the band and with producer George Martin, it was decided that it should be more up-tempo, so they sped that up too. I don't know how much, maybe more than 8 BPMs. But it became quite a different song, apparently. I mean, it's not a Dylan-esque dirge at all. Even though lyrically there's some I guess melancholic themes. It's an up-tempo rocker with some great fills by Ringo. Okay, so let's consider John's vocal that was isolated by AI and patched together and used as the basis for this song, Now and Then. Well, the melody is lovely. It's melancholic. It's innovative, surprising. memorable. I've been singing it to myself, humming it. It's been buzzing around my head ever since I heard it, and the song has grown on me, primarily, I think, because of the melody. It's haunting as well because as I say, it's like a voice from the grave. But I would say that's one of the strengths of the song, this melody. Now, lyrically, it's plaintive, nostalgic, a bit simplistic, but simplicity is not always a bad thing. As I listened, I asked myself, if we're considering this autobiographically, if we're assuming, and we have no reason to assume necessarily that it's autobiographical, although Lennon did write openly about his own personal life, so maybe it's not too far-fetched to assume that, there are some autobiographical elements in it. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that there are. Who's the song about? Is it about May Pang, the side piece, girlfriend, uh, full-time partner during the Lost Weekend? Or is it the wife, Yoko Ono? Well, it was written in 1977, or maybe it wasn't. It was recorded then. Maybe it was written before that. But in any case, as I listen to the refrain, I know it's true. It's all because of you. And if I make it through, it's all because of you. That seems like it might be inspired by Yoko, but maybe not. Maybe that's also referring to May Pang. Maybe it's both of them. Maybe it's neither of them. The chorus, though, let's assume it was written and recorded in 1977 after the Lost Weekend. He no longer has any contact with May Pang, or, very, very little. They may have met from time to time after that, but listen to this. Now and then I miss you. Oh, now and then I want you to be there for me, always to return to me. That sounds like it might be uh, directed towards May Pang, although let's assume it was written during the Lost Weekend. Maybe he's pining away for Yoko. Or maybe he had some other woman that we don't know about. Anything's possible. Interesting to speculate, though. I'll also point out that in the demo, there's a pre-chorus that was completely excised from the version of the song that was just released. So Paul and Ringo, again, probably mostly Paul, chose not to include this pre-chorus. It was just cut. They didn't use it at all. But as I say, I listened to it, and there were a few lines which I thought were quite nice. I don't want to lose you, abuse you, or confuse you. I really liked the wordplay in that section of the pre-chorus. And again, you can find that on YouTube and listen and compare. What do you think? Is it do you like the song? Maybe not the recording, since the quality is not so good, but is the song structure better? Is the demo version of the song better in terms of song structure than what was recently released? Okay, now we have to consider Paul's contributions, right? Um, we had they got the vocal a very patchy, fragmentary vocal. And then they went to work on it. And of course, Paul is the one who's going to be finishing the song and doing the arrangement. George is no longer around to help with that. And Ringo is just waiting for that to be finished so he can play drums, we assume. So the most important part is the keyboard, I would say, because Paul has to replace the uh, the piano part from the demo. Even though the piano and vocal were isolated, the quality and the performance of the piano part were, you know, um, somewhat underwhelming. So Paul redid the keyboard part, and he simplified the chord structure. Uh, in fact, um, the first couple of chords reminded me of the beginning of his single from 2006. This never happened before. It's not quite the same, but I hear echoes of it. So he redid the piano. I'm told he also did some harpsichord, but I didn't really focus on that the few times I listened to the song. Maybe it's low in the mix. Okay, and then of course he adds bass. I assume he used his iconic Hofner bass. And there's some nice little fills that he plays before the choruses. It's tasteful. It's good. Nothing um, too amazing, but it's solid. A solid bass line. Okay, and then he contributed some vocals and some lyrics. There's a line that was incomplete in the demo. Lennon is just humming to himself. You can't even hear him really seeing actual words. So Paul filled that in most obviously in the line um, that I will love you. I think Lennon sang that and then was just humming, and then Paul uh, added I will love you. Um, and I think there may have been other places where he helped out. When I listened to that 1977 demo, it seems like um, there were some other parts that probably Paul had to complete, or maybe they just used some trickery, some EQ and volume boost, and who knows, maybe even some auto tune. And again, um, I think that's perfectly legitimate, whatever they did, because, uh, you know, John always encouraged George Martin to to add effects to his vocal. He'd say, drown it in mayonnaise or cranberry sauce or whatever. He was not always happy with the sound of his voice, so if you know the producer wanted to experiment with different effects or filters, he was always open to that. Okay. Now, also significant, Paul adds lap steel guitar. Not exactly slide, but kind of. Um, kind of slide guitar. Uh, and this too is not without precedent. Paul actually played some of George's solos in the heyday, most famously on Taxman. Yes, that's right. That frenetic guitar solo on Taxman, which is unlike anything you've ever heard before, that was actually played by Paul. That's a George song, Taxman, but Paul is the one playing that crazy solo. So, okay, he does the solo on the lap steel on Now and Then. Um, Nothing special. Just he supposedly he wanted to do it in the style of George. I'm not sure he succeeded at that. George, especially later, became a really fantastic slide guitar player, and I was underwhelmed by Paul's lap steel guitar part in Now and Then. But I'll have to say, towards the end, I noticed a kind of Indian flavor, almost like he was trying to make the lap steel sound like a sitar. And of course, that's a nice tribute to George, who was so much influenced by Indian music, played the sitar himself, was a student of Ravi Shankar. So I did notice that. I thought that was a nice little callback to the Indian influences on Beatles music. But again, if you really want to hear a great slide guitar performance by George, I recommend Rising Sun on his posthumously released album Brainwashed. That's from 2002. Uh, just a beautiful performance. That song is transcendent. It is a spiritual experience, lyrically, musically, and then the slide guitar is just, it touches something deep inside of me. So poignant, so beautiful, profound. Have I talked it up enough? Rising Sun from Brainwashed. Okay, then we come to Ringo. Well, Ringo just does his thing, He makes the song swing. He's playing some rim shots. He does some, I would describe them as jazzy. He plays some jazzy type licks, but it's solid. The song swings, it rocks gently. What can you say? Ringo does his thing, and it's effective. George's contribution, very minor. He did record an acoustic and apparently an electric guitar part as well. I think they're they're both. I can't really hear them. I think they're quite low in the mix. You can maybe you know notice them faintly in the background, but not much of a contribution from George. But he is there, and he's there in spirit, if nothing else. And he's also apparently singing some of the background vocals. This is I think mostly in the instrumental part. I'm told they took little snippets from other songs, most notably Because from 1969's Abbey Road, the 4-part harmony there. So apparently all four of them are singing together again on Now and Then, but they just you know copy pasted from Because, allegedly. There may have been other songs from the catalog that were chopped up and included as well, but I'm pretty sure Because is part of that instrumental section. That 4-part harmony appears during that lap steel guitar part. Okay, and then the final element we should consider is the contribution of Giles Martin. Giles, not George Martin, and not Jeff Lynne. So he helped with production, and apparently he um, was responsible for the strings that appear on this track. According to Paul, they provided the orchestra with sheet music, but they didn't tell them what was going on. They just led them to believe it was a Paul solo project and not a Beatles song. I guess they didn't want that information being leaked out, but um, probably Giles arranged the strings. Maybe Paul helped out some, but nothing special, really. I'm not sure how much the strings add to the overall quality of the song. But there is one interesting thing that was pointed out by another YouTube commentator whose name I forget, but he pointed out that at the very end of the song, there's a time signature change from 4/4 to 3/4, and that may well have been Giles Martin's suggestion. So credit to him for that. It's kind of an interesting way for the song to conclude. But it doesn't really conclude with that. At the very end, we hear Ringo say "good one" very faintly. So this studio chatter is another kind of callback to the Beatles' history or discography, right? Like, I guess most famously, there's the shout at the end of Helter Skelter on the White Album from 1968 when Ringo says, "I've got blisters on my fingers." So, again, another self-referential moment with that studio chatter, which is interesting. All right, so let's wrap it up with some final thoughts. And again, as always on Guitar and Pen, we want to know what we can learn from whatever it is we're discussing or analyzing. What can we learn as songwriters, musicians, and music producers? What can we learn from now and then? What principles can we either, glean or have reinforced? Well, I would say, first of all, I'm reminded of Andy Partridge's comment, Andy Partridge of XTC. I'm reminded of his comment that one should never throw out one's bits and pieces. Like, always hang on to your scraps, and eventually you will finish them. And they certainly did that, didn't they? They just waited from 1977 to 2023. They had those scraps, and eventually they figured out how to complete them. And you can usually do that. If you wait long enough, if you keep it, save it, write it down, record it, revisit it later. You may not always know what to do with it at the time you work out the chord structure, or when you write down the lyrics. You might not have a melody, or you might have a melody but no lyrics. Don't throw it away. Save it. And eventually you can complete it, make a song out of it. And not just a song. I think this is good advice for all artists. Let me do a little shameless self-promotion here. I just released my new travelogue, Pilgrimizing, a record of a pleasure trip to the Holy Land. And that's based on a trip I took during the asymmetrical war of 2014, and I just released it now in 2023. I didn't wait as long as the Beatles waited to finish Now and Then, but it was almost a decade in the making. I never threw away the journal that included all my notes from that trip, and eventually uh, I realized what I wanted to do with those notes, those very extensive notes, and I made a book out of that notebook, that little green notebook. I made a book out of it. So never throw away your bits and pieces. Another important principle: cannibalize yourself. That's a way of, you know, describing the kind of self-referential um, elements that we've already highlighted. And I would just mention another one. The very name Now and Then reminds me of the 1966 album Yesterday and Today. You know, past and present, present and past, yesterday and today, now and then. It seems like, I don't know if that was intentional, but that is immediately what I thought of. And, there were all those other moments with the count off, the studio chatter at the end, um, the copy pasting that was done with some of those old tracks, the references to the earlier discography. Cannibalize yourself. This is also this kind of repetition variation, always doing the same thing but in a slightly different way. This is what Bowie described as always crashing in the same car. And it's probably an idea that he got from William S. Burroughs, who, if you've read the works of Burroughs, one work kind of merges with another. It's like he's always writing the same book, but it's always different. It's always the same, but always different. So, yeah, that's another principle that I think is at play in Now and Then in a good way. And finally, the third principle I wanted to discuss was wave your freak flag high. That's always a good thing, or almost always a good thing. And I'm not sure that the Beatles succeeded at doing that in this particular release. I feel like they could have been much more experimental. I mean, they had this beautiful melody. They used AI to isolate vocal from piano. They had John's ghostly, melancholic, nostalgic vocal as the basis for their song. I think Paul's piano parts are good. The bass is fine. The drums are good. But I think he could have been more adventurous with the slide part, the lap steel. It just didn't seem to have the same power and force. I mean, of course, he can't play like George, but he could have done something like he did on Taxman when he really just went for it. Of course, wave your freak flag high is a principle derived from Jimi Hendrix, who is responsible for that line. That's a lyric from If 6 Was 9. I'm gonna wave my freak flag high, he sang. But yeah, I think more could have been done with the strings, as I mentioned. Giles Martin's arrangement, assuming it was mostly his, there's just not much to get excited about there. I think more could have been done with that. And maybe if Jeff Lynne had produced this instead, and I don't know why he didn't, maybe he wasn't available. I think he's given a production credit, but that's probably because he recorded, those early sessions during the anthology project. Um, but it doesn't seem like he was involved with this new release. It was Giles Martin behind the board, but I don't know. Jeff Lynne maybe could have given the strings more of an ELO quality, which would have worked well. Lennon called ELO the son of the Beatles or the children of the Beatles or something like that. So that could have been interesting. But yeah, that's about it. Um, the last thing I wanted to do is rank those Lennon demos, those three demos that were finally completed. How do they stack up? Well, for me, by far the best of those three is Real Love. As I say, I think it's their final masterpiece. Um, I mean, if this had been released during their heyday, I think it would have been one of their biggest hits. It's fantastic. I listen to it, you know, once a month maybe, or once every 2 months. I think it's a fantastic track. Um, a beautiful John lyric vocal performance, and then a true collaboration. Um, they all worked on this during the uh, time of the anthology project. Um, Beautiful. George's solo on that, it is one of the most. I mean, listening to that is a spiritual experience. The notes he plays, the way he bends the notes. I mean, he really makes the guitar gently weep. Uh, and it weeps tears of joy. Uh, I like the song, as you can tell. I mean, I feel ecstatic listening to it. So that's definitely, for me, the best of the three. Uh, in second place is Free as a Bird, which is interesting because it's a true John Paul collaboration, almost like We Can Work It Out. You've got the Lennon demo, but Paul actually adds um, a very interesting bridge, which was not part of the original demo, presumably. So it's like a real Lennon McCartney collaboration. And George's slide guitar on Free as a Bird is really excellent, excellent guitar work. So in third place is the recently released Now and Then. I just don't think it measures up to those other two. Uh, who knows why? The original audio quality was not as good. George was no longer around. Um, and maybe they just ran out of ideas or they didn't feel as inspired. But I'm glad they did it. I'm glad they finished Now and Then. Um, as Picasso says, not every painting can be a masterpiece. I don't think Now and Then is a masterpiece, but it is a solid track. And, it's a Beatles song. It's the last Beatles song. So just enjoy. That's what I think. What about you? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and all of that. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.